So let it be written. So let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. In this video, we're going to talk to you about how to make awesome villains. Everyone wants to make awesome villains. They are fun, but sometimes difficult to come up with. So what makes a villain awesome? What's the difference between a villain that just is meh, or doesn't engage the players, or isn't as cool or powerful as you thought? We're going to go through that. I'm going to give you the number one trick that I thought it just broke my brain when I finally figured it out, because it seems counterintuitive. What I used to do, and this is what you're not allowed to do anymore, is I would come up with the villain. And then I would find out what the players were playing. And that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense, because a really good villain should be directly opposing the heroes. So now this is what I do. And I wait. We have what's called a session 0. If you don't know what that is, look up our videos on it. In the session 0, the players tell me exactly what kind of game they want to play. So in our Those That Remain campaign, black market, going into this land of Faygrave that's sort of lawless and wild, and that's the feel they wanted. That's the vibe. So now I know exactly what characters they're playing, what kind of game they want. So your job is to make the villain go against all of that. Like, what would be the worst? If they want freedom and the black market and all this stuff, I'm going to bring someone super lawful in there. And I'm going to put an end to all their fun. And so that is the trick. Don't come up with the villain before you know who your heroes are. And make sure that the villain opposes what they would think is cool or fun or what they want. That's the trick. And once I started doing that, the villains got way easier. And I realized the disparity was I was making villains that really didn't attach or link to. Batman needs a Joker. You know what I mean? And so you have the ability to write a cool villain that is just going to go right up against the heroes if you wait.
Yeah, and kind of going off of what Tim said there, for me at least, and other people might disagree on exactly, but for me, the most important thing about the villain by far is their motivation. Like, why are they doing what they're doing, and how does it relate to the story that's at hand? And like, there are tons of fantasy villains that are totally fine, and again, if it's your thing, then I don't mean to step on that, but just where it's just like, this is just the born evil thing who just wants to destroy, and it's just in its nature. And like, that can be fun, for just a lighthearted, crazy fantasy game. There's nothing wrong with that. But I've always found that a little bit lacking in terms of like punch of like, if there's no sort of like ideology driving the villain behavior, then it just sort of becomes just kill the bad thing rather than like engage with the idea. And it sort of leaves a lot of like exploration about the setting on the floor if you do that, of like, what sort of tone am I trying to get across in this world? Like, how do these people live their lives and get around? Because the reality is, villain classification or not, every person, every living creature has a motivation. They have things that they want, and they have things that they will or won't do to get to that goal. And some people's lines of what they will and won't do might be in different places, and that might put people in opposition. So, just as Tim was saying, you want your villain to be like opposed to the players and have a sensible connection to them, as far as like, why is this person the person that I'm putting in front of the players? And it's kind of like, again, what Tim was saying of like, if you have a person who like is really like upstanding and wants to like use the spirit of the law to like make everybody's lives better, and you also have a rogue who's kind of like, oh, I'm gonna play fast and loose with the rules. Who do you put in front of them? You put in a tyrannical dictator, someone who's going to use the law to gain his own power and advance his own strategy. The rogue's going to hate him because there's all these crazy rules that he has to follow, or he has to break them carefully because the punishments are strict. The lawful good paladin is going to hate him because he's using the law to do bad instead of using it to do. So like, there's one person who might oppose 3 or 4 or all of the people in the party, And then you can also take the next step of like, okay, well, like, why is he doing this? How is he doing this? You know, what's his game plan here? Like, what's his end goal? Like, assuming the party does nothing, where does this villain's plan get to? You know, does he conquer the world? Does he just rule this part of the kingdom and this part of the world's just worse off for it? You know, what is he willing to do that the players aren't willing to do? And vice versa, which I think is a point of good contrast to like look at when it comes to villains is like the things that the party think the party is not willing to do to accomplish their goals. Give the villain even a similar goal to them, but have their line be different. Of like, we all want the environment here to be safe. You know, the villain and the players both want this ecosystem to thrive against people who are destroying it. You know, to switch away from the tyrannical dictator example. You could just as easily do the opposite, where, like, in that sense, the dictator wants the opposite of what the players want. He wants to rule with an iron fist. The players want, you know, him not to do that. They might want different things as players. You know, one wants less law, one wants better law, but the villain is the opposite against them. Another way that I like to do villains that can add a lot of nuance and sort of humanity and moral questionability to the game, if that sort of thing is interesting to you, have the villain want the same thing as the players, but be willing to do things that the players won't do and cannot allow to accomplish their goal. So to use kind of go back to my example of like, the environment here is being ransacked by a group of people who are trying to destroy it for profit. They're logging too much, they're mining too much, whatever it is, and it's not stable and sustainable. The players want to stop them, but the villain also wants to stop them, but the villain is willing to do things that the players would never allow. He's just going to kill off the people who are doing this. He's going to intentionally cause like chaos and carnage to do that. And the players might say like, hey, look, you're on the right track with wanting these people not to do what they're doing, but what you are doing is not okay, and like we have to oppose you on that ground. So it all just kind of comes down to like, what does the villain want? What will they do? What will they not do? And specifically find the points where that contends the most against the party on either side, whether it's because they want different things from the party and only one of them can get it, or that they want the same thing as the party, and it's just sort of a matter of how that's going about, or even like just limited resources. Sometimes the most interesting villain is people on the same foot as the players, but only one person can get what they want. Like another example is like two groups who are fighting for the same land. You know, the players want the land, the enemies want the land. Who's right? No one really. They're both doing questionable things to get there. The only thing that makes them the villain is that only one of you can survive and you want it to be you, you know? So it's just a bunch of different ways to look at villain motivations and sort of how to sort of match them against the party. So yeah.
In talking about villains, I may say good or I may say memorable, but usually I want you to be considering that what I'm trying to make and help you make in this video is a memorable villain. The ones you see in the TV shows and movies that, and you feel for them, like any villain Christoph Waltz plays, I think is his name. There's something about him where they're a well-done villain. And I think here's the way I like to think of it. It's like in English when you say, he and I or she and I, the rule for knowing if that sentence is right is if you can take the other person out of the sentence. Mom and I went to the Wizards Guild. It comes, I went to the Wizards Guild. That still makes sense. But you couldn't say mom and me because me went to the Wizard Guild doesn't make sense. I feel like it's the same with villains and heroes. If you can take the heroes out of the equation and the villain still makes sense, you should have a memorable villain. They're trying to do something. They have a goal. They have aims. It's not the person getting in their way that has created any of their aims. That is a separate thing. So what I like to try and focus on is design the person and then make the players make them a villain. In a sense, a villain is only what the players see as the opposite of what they feel. Sometimes not even the opposite, but as you described, a few cases, Jeff, where in some way they're the other simply because they want something I want, but I want to have it, right? It's that simple. But the thing is, empathy is sort of little more than one revelation away. So in making a memorable villain, remember that it's always a lot more complicated than it seems. The villain that wants to destroy the world, as Jeff pointed out, those sort of very big overarching ones makes a little bit less sense. But if you consider crime, for example, any villain that is heisting something, stealing something, a moment later you could find out that, oh, well, they're doing it to make money to pay for their mother's surgery. You know what I mean? Like, you disagree with what they're doing and maybe how they're doing it, but you can understand how that motivation would drive a person to do what they've done. Suddenly, you have what I like to think is a memorable villain if you do that right. So that's the big thing. Try and design people with goals and motivations using the tips Tim and Jeff set out, but make sure that none of them rely on the players. You can tie them together, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But usually, like Jeff said, you want to make sure that the villain has an end game in mind, and that separate from there being, a story surrounding them, that it would make sense if you just wrote it out.
So that is just a little bit of what we have to say about villains. But what about you? Write in the comments. You can either put your favorite villain. That's always a good one. Or, top 5 even. Or what do you do to make your villains cooler, more memorable? What's your trick? And we're Tabletop Terrors. We're all about fun, creativity, and tabletop games. If you like that kind of stuff, then we welcome you. Be a part of the channel by subscribing. And if you hit the notification bell, you'll be alerted whenever we put up videos just like this. We always end our videos with a TabTerian Toast. So grab a drink and join us.
May you mend the first break.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
Slancha.
So there are a lot of different types of TV shows, which but one type I've identified is what I call a Twin Peaks style TV show. Another one like that is in the same style, there aren't many, is the show Dark on Netflix. I haven't watched a ton of Twin Peaks, but I finished Dark recently. It is one of the best examples of the sort of constant fractaling out of everybody's lives, of like, you meet a character in one person's story and the next episode is about that person and how complicated their life is, and suddenly their actions make sense, but there are people in their story where you're like, well, why did they do that? And then it goes to them, and it's like it somehow walks you through every character in the story and makes you relate and empathize with all of them, and at the end go, well, then wait a minute, it's too complicated. It's like that, to me, they show off that complicated sense. And so watching shows like that shows you how no matter what the answer is, there are always more questions if you want there to be.